once has he ever appeared in flesh, and that was when my husband died.
Phyllis Krystal talks about her many years with Sai Baba.
It was as if he was really there, right by my bed, leaning over and whispering in my ear, "But have you forgotten that Swami married you to your inner husband?" He always tells us not to advertise him, not to proselytize, but he's perfectly capable of advertising himself. So he really requires us to stay as silent as possible, and he says his life is his message, but so must our lives be. Many people do not know really who their partner is.
So they're effectively living with strangers.
Pretty much. And that's why so many of them are so unhappy.
Welcome to Souljourns, the story of how Sai Baba continues to transform a woman who is nearing 100 years of age. This interview with Phyllis Krystal was conducted in June of 2008 in New York.
Sai Baba, lead me to ask good questions.
Okay, yes. Eyeglass. Bring me the answers to the questions.
Phyllis, it's a delight to be able to talk to you again on camera. The last time we did this, it was here in Hal Honig's beautiful house overlooking Central Park 5 years ago.
I can't believe it.
This is June of 2008, and you just passed your 94th birthday.
Yes.
What's that feel like to be a Baba devotee at 94? Just a question off the wall to get the ball rolling.
Well, I think it was more interesting to be a devotee at 59, which is the first time I ever went to see him, when most of the people who were there were very much younger, about the age of my two daughters. So everyone was asking, well, why are you here? Where are your daughters?
Did you ever wonder why it was almost to the age of 60 before the magic of Sai Baba came into your life?
Yes, I never even knew he existed. And but now that I look back, I realize that the first thing he ever said to me really was quite important. I never knew what it meant before. But when he first saw me, he said, "So, you have come at last." And I thought to myself, how could I have gotten here any earlier? I only heard about you 2 months ago.
You remember?
But now, of course, I realized that he was teaching me from within, the work before I ever knew he was in the world.
Were you ever suspicious of that opening line of his to you? You've come at last.
Yes, I couldn't understand it for such a long time.
And what sense do you make of it today?
I think that he always says that not only is he God, but we are also, and he wants us to find his counterpart in our own heart. So I think the counterpart in my own heart was probably teaching me, and so I suppose he wondered why I hadn't arrived any sooner in physical reality. That's my hunch.
Since our last meeting 5 years ago in this format, tell me about how your feelings have deepened for Sai Baba. How your feelings, how your understanding for Sai Baba has continued to deepen, assuming it has, of course.
Yes, no, it's changed a lot, and I think the first thing he ever said when we were about to leave on that first interview, that first visit to him, has taken on more meaning during the years, and I think he's making quite an issue of it right now. He said at that time, I asked at that time, well, what do we do now? You know, we've come to see you. What's next? Not having any idea what the program would be or what the protocol could be. And he said, first you must remember that you don't need to come back to see this little body, pointing to himself. And he let that sink in and then continued, find my counterpart in your own heart. And then the last sentence, but you will come back to be re-energized. And now I understand what he means. And I think now that he's becoming more frail and not as accessible, he's making a supreme effort to separate people from the need to worship his form and turn within to their own Baba self or their own God self.
But for what you just said, that may cause us to sacrifice becoming re-energized by having the privilege to witness his form yet again.
I think he's kept me re-energized in order to go back, and maybe going back has kept me re-energized. I think it's a circle.
And in light of everything you just said, you still have plans, I know, this year and perhaps beyond this year to go back to India again to see him.
Well, I didn't go for quite a while, and now in the last 2 years, this will be the 4th time, which really amazes me. But it's not exactly our choice. It's somehow it happens.
And it's not an easy trip even for somebody who's 44, let alone 94?
No, it's not an easy trip at all. It never has been for me. So my limit is about 8 days.
I want to ask you about how Baba shows himself in your life today. Maybe through dreams. Does he ever appear in the flesh? Is it a thought process? What's it like?
Only once has he ever appeared in flesh, and that was when my husband died in Hamburg in Germany. And he has come in dreams, not terribly many. One fairly recently, which was quite a surprise again, but most of the time I think it's a continual presence. It's an awareness of the proximity of his energy.
Surely you were dealing with enormous grief when your husband died in Germany, and then compounding that was the, no doubt, shock of the realization of Baba appearing in the form?
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, after my husband died, I still felt committed to finish the seminars that I'd started, and so I was lying in bed that night, about 2 days after he died, and talking to Baba and saying, "You're just going to have to help if you want me to finish the seminars. I can't. You'll just have to take some of this shock away from me." And with that, it was as if he was really there, right by my bed, leaning over and whispering in my ear, "But have you forgotten that Swami married you to your inner husband?" And he had. He'd made a ring for me several years previously and married me to my inner husband. And as soon as he said that, all of the shock left, and I was able to go on. But that's the only time he's appeared in such a tangible form.
So I think I understand what he possibly meant by saying those words to you. What do you take it that he meant? To pay more attention to the spirit within, or to continue with your work plus be centered on his form?
Well, I think he expects all of us to really put the two parts of us together, because we got a brain and we got a heart. In other words, we have two aspects, yin and yang. And the marriage, the inner marriage of those two, means that you are living life in a more effective, a more balanced way. Mm-hmm. And so I think he had made this ring for me quite several years before my husband died, in my husband's presence. Originally he'd given us a marriage when I turned 60. My husband was already past 60 when we first heard about him. And that's when he usually gives a Vedic marriage.
For men and for women?
Yes, usually when the man turns 60. Mm-hmm. But with me, with us, it was when I turned 60.
And what does a Vedic marriage mean to you?
It's a very interesting ceremony where he remarries the couple, and he expects them then to live their life in more depth, with more awareness of who they are. They've lived their life, they've brought up their children, they've taken their jobs, most of them have retired at the 60, and so the rest of their life, he expects them as a couple to go forward together into a more spiritual way of life.
My guess is that not too many people are even aware of the invitation to live their lives that way after they turn 60.
No, very few people. They feel, oh, I can hardly wait for retirement. and then they just vegetate, most of them.
Well, what does it look like? Paint a picture of somebody who really wants to follow that invitation to draw closer to their spiritual center after 60. What would you think they would be doing, most people?
Well, I think most people, if they're willing to do this, and there are not very many, I don't think, is to really discover who each one is, because most people who are living together don't have a clue as to who their partner really is.
You really believe that? You really believe that?
Oh yes, I've seen it.
Even though they've lived with one another for 20, 30, 40 years?
Most people connect through their roles, but not through who they really are.
So
I think many people do not know really who their partner is.
So they're effectively living with strangers?
Pretty much. And that's why so many of them are so unhappy.
Say a word or two about the women and or men who are single for whatever reasons at 60, when it's time to probe more deeply.
Then Swami frequently will say, don't marry, live a celibate life, if he feels that that's a necessary way to live, to learn whatever is needed. But other times he will definitely bring people together in a partnership. Very often he will marry them. And sometimes they're really, it seems like a very strange combination of two people. But he likes to use couples as his emissaries or his mouthpieces to travel around the world and tell people about his message.
And say a word or two about the third remaining equation. Those people who are married, one of whom is a devotee or on a profound spiritual path, and for whatever reason their spouse is not.
Sometimes that can be very, very difficult. It is with many people I know. But if the one who is a devotee has a really strong connection within him or herself with what I call the high C for higher consciousness, then it's possible to live with someone who doesn't believe. But it's not easy.
It isn't easy.
Not at all.
When I meet these people, I sense a profound sense of loneliness and yearning to share with their mate, with their partner.
Absolutely.
What they know.
Yes, but you can't force it. You can't sell it.
And you're still sticking to your guns about the fact that we cannot teach another person anything.
You can teach,
change them.
You can share, but you cannot change someone else.
So we can teach and we can share.
Yes.
But we cannot change them
no.
to adopt our ways.
Change ourselves. I think a lot of couples have decided that after they live together, each one will change the other, but it never works.
Phyllis,
you might pretend to change, but it's not real.
Are you still learning from Baba's teachings, or is it mostly a matter now of practicing the teachings he's given you many years ago?
He is emphasizing that we should now definitely practice the teachings, not just read about them or listen to them, but actually practice them in our everyday life. And he's getting more and more insistent on that. But many people don't want it that way.
Do you sense he's becoming seriously frustrated with his teachings falling on deaf ears?
I don't know whether he's ever frustrated. I would be, but I don't know whether he is.
Has Baba surprised you in any ways lately regarding his health, in his discourses, in his dreams to you, or in any other way?
No, not that I can remember. His health is a mystery to all of us, but I suspect, and it's just my own private opinion, that he's really trying to make a point of the fact that we are not the body. He often says, this is not Sai Baba who you see sitting here. In other words, this is just the house in which the real self lives. And therefore it is destructible, but the real self isn't. It lives continuously.
I've had people like you tell me a dozen times what the real self is, and I still cannot get it through my thick head. What is the real self?
It's the indestructible part of us, the spirit or the soul or whatever you want to call it, that's that doesn't die when the body dies, and it incarnates in one life after another life, and in between it goes back to its spirit aspect, and then takes on a body to learn what still needs to be learned.
I've also heard that it includes the fact that it's, nor is it our mind, nor is it our thinking or our personality, and I've got to tell you, that's a little disappointing to think none of Phyllis that I know of is Phyllis today. Her personality, her mind, her intellect, her thinking exists in the next dimension. It's just her spirit and her soul. I don't mean to be making light of this, but there's parts of Phyllis, there's parts of my father, there's parts of my children I'd like to think would continue past this life.
Well, it seems as if that is true, but in a more rarefied form, not with all of the ego attachments. It's as if it's more in a purer form.
So it does not disturb you that what you know of as Phyllis today might no longer exist in the next realm?
No, because I think there'll be the Phyllis essence, whatever she learned in this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really, if you think of the complete self as a diamond, each life is like a facet of that diamond. So each life is a part of the whole.
Okay, that's a pretty nice way of putting it. You've given me hope. Can you share with us, if you will, any leelas you've had since our last meeting several years ago? Any significant leelas in the last couple of years that have touched you in a deep way?
And what do you actually mean by leela?
When Baba shows his form in a unique way that might catch you off guard, but it's his unmistakable stamp of his presence or his part in your life. Something that's otherwise...
it's becoming more of an everyday occurrence.
Really?
Yes. There'll be significant things that will happen, which we immediately think, oh well, that could only be Baba. But I think that's been going on all the time without our being aware of it, and maybe we're becoming more aware of his presence or his actions. I think maybe one of the most significant ones recently for me happened about this time last year when I broke my hip in my own home. Therefore, I had absolutely no time or opportunity to check for a hospital or a particularly competent surgeon. I had to take whatever was available at that time of night. It was 10 o'clock at night. And I felt that it must have been Baba's influence that I was under the care of a surgeon who, instead of making a very long, I would say many inches incision in my hip to put in the titanium replacement, I had only a 2-inch incision. And that's very unusual. And so it took much less time to heal and is much firmer and more secure. But I had no influence, none of us had any influence on that.
Baba wanted to put you back on your feet very quickly, and he did.
Yes, very quickly. In fact, the doctors were pretty horrified when I had the fall and the operation at the end of May, and when they asked me at the hospital what my goals were, so that they could help me achieve whatever those goals were, I said, well, I'm going to India at the end of July. And they were absolutely horrified. They said, you can't be serious. But I did go to India.
And not only did you survive, but you thrived, and you're going back in several months. Actually, just a couple of months from now.
Yes.
How important is maintaining religious practice for Baba followers? I attended this beautiful cathedral of St. John the Divine today. Several hundred people in bliss, really obviously, even the stranger walking in off the street, enjoying the ritual of the liturgy of their spiritual tradition. And yet Swami makes it available to come to him inside of our hearts to find all that we really need, as he says. So how important is it for people to maintain or to have a spiritual tradition outside of just being with Swami in their heart?
Don't know how it is for most people, but after I had been brought up so strictly in the Church of England, I absolutely moved completely away from it and wanted no more part of it. And so I have not been particularly open to any religious practice, not because I don't believe in the teaching, but the way it is controlled by the priesthood. So, but Baba himself says he's not come to to form another religion. He's come to help people to be more sincere followers of whatever their religion happens to be.
And presumably there are people in organized religions that are not as controlling as the tradition that you came from or that I come from, for whom it's not only compatible but beautiful to have Swami and their
and some of the people, I think, are better devotees than some of the people who just follow Baba and say they're devotees.
That's interesting. You think some might even become better devotees?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They've got that structure that they've been familiar with.
It
Plus
depends
Baba.
upon the person individually.
Baba says, don't think, feel. Move from your head to your heart. It seems so simple, but it's not.
I think is the lacking balance between the yin and yang qualities, using the Chinese words. The yin connected to the heart, and the yang connected to the head. And I think as we look around the world, it's really predominantly yang, which is activity, doing, thinking, speaking, all outward. And the yin is all receiving, listening, feeling. And we're out of balance. And so I think that one of the reasons he's here is to connect us back to our hearts, because they've been bypassed.
And having heard you spoken before, my guess is that our addictions might just only increase that state of being out of balance. The many addictions that as a society we have.
Well, I think many addictions are an escape from reality, escape from handling the situation that we find in our life at the present. It's too difficult, so we escape. But also, I think that many of the addictions stem from the fact that we haven't found out how to love or to be loved. And so we're very hungry for love.
Well, let me ask you a simple question. If for those people who have never experienced being loved before, how would they ever learn how to be loved?
Exactly. And so they don't know how. And particularly this is true of men, who in most societies, most cultures, are raised to be very macho, not to show their feelings. I was brought up in England, and it was very true there. You had to be very how shall I say, very serious. You had to be very strong. You must never show any weakness. You must never show any feelings. In fact, it was indecent while I was growing up to show any feeling.
Surely that has all changed today.
I don't know. I haven't lived in England recently.
What about the culture you've been experiencing? I know you've lived in America for a while before moving to Germany.
Yes.
Have you seen people, men especially, opening up regarding their feelings more?
Sometimes when they were willing to engage in the method I've been taught, then they did get back into contact with their feelings.
I notice that mostly women still are really engaged and interested in your method.
I think that's true of almost any of the methods or any of the therapies.
So is there no hope for men, or is there another approach that has to be?
No, I don't feel that way, because my experience has been that when men do finally understand what the work what the method I've been taught can achieve, and they really begin to understand that it can be helpful, then they move much faster than the women.
Really?
Yes.
Now that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Why would they?
I think they're, because they've been trained in the way they have from childhood, not to show any feeling, that inhibits them to start with. It slows them down. But they like to see results. So when they see the results of the work in other people, then they slowly begin to open themselves to the possibility of using it too.
How much has Baba helped you with worries, anxieties that we all have?
Tremendously. In fact, he says, "Why fear when I am near?" And at first, we don't know quite how to take that, but as we conscientiously and regularly try to make contact with what he calls the God self, which is the real self, or what devotees call the Baba self, then somehow or other, the worries and the fears seem to disappear, because we are able to make contact with this part of ourselves which has no fear. And when we say yes to him, that we are willing to be his instrument, then it frees us from a lot of the old problems that we used to have.
For those who are possibly new to even the spiritual path that you're on, is this something that's as simple as simply reminding yourself that God's in your life, that God's omnipresent, that God hears your thoughts and senses your fears, and that by staying simply aware of that idea that God is with you, they may listen? So awareness is key, consciousness is key. Am I touching on it the right way here?
Well, Baba himself says that he does say he's God, but that we should finish the quotation. He also says, "And so are all of you," but he knows he's God, and we don't. So we have to get to the point where we realize that our real self is God, as he puts it, and therefore we can get in touch more and more with that part of us, and eventually enlightenment can come about, maybe several lifetimes from now, who knows, when we do become one with who we really are. In other words, it's thy will, not mine.
You and I were talking about this last night, and as I recall, we described this as a possible pitfall, in that upon hearing what Baba's words are, you are God also, you just don't realize it yet. Many people can possibly err in deciding they intellectually become aware that they are God.
Oh yes.
When the point is, it may be a partial intellectual awareness, but not a full body integrated heartfelt awareness, which can lead to difficulty.
Very. And it can lead, as you put it, to pitfalls. That's when the ego gets in and wants all of us to feel important, or to compete with others and be better than anyone else. But Baba says at the soul level, or the God level, everybody is absolutely equal. Nobody is better than anyone else, and nobody is less important than anyone else.
So will there be roadmaps along the way to help people decide when they truly arrive at that place where they know they're God, or will it be an automatic fait accompli and no discussion necessary?
I suspect, because of what Baba has said, that it's a gradual process. Because it's very difficult for most people to give up their desires, to give up their plans, and really to surrender to the God within and trust it, and then accept whatever it brings. In other words, it's not easy to say, yes, I will be the instrument of the real self.
And one of the biggest barriers, I'm going to guess, to becoming that one day is the ever-present status of ego in our lives.
Absolutely.
Is there anything in our lives that's not ego?
Not in our everyday life. It pretty much controls most of us,
and
along with our desires, but not just our desires for things, our desires that things won't happen, that we won't get what we don't want. Because we can want something, but we can also not want other things. So we have to look at the desires both ways.
And of course, the ever-present desire in most people's lives regarding how anything on any given day reflects on them.
Yes.
On us, on me. That's all ego.
Most people in the world right now are much more interested in what's good for them, what they want and what they don't want, with very little consideration of the effect on other people.
There must be a dozen ways to practice moving beyond your ego. Can you describe one or two significant ways?
I think it's just, well, we have a little chant or a little saying, surrender, trust, and accept. And that means surrender, but surrender only to the real self, or what we call the high C, the high self, which is the only thing in the world you can really trust, because it's the only part of you that knows what's right for you. And then to accept whatever comes and ask for its help. That's the formula.
Let me see if I can put this another way so that it really becomes something that any one of us can attempt to follow. And that is, however we might envision our higher self, our higher consciousness, our spirit self, our soul self, or God, they're probably all the same.
Call it.
Yeah. So are you telling me that if I were to begin each day and periodically throughout each day say, God, it's not my will, it's your will, guide me to the lessons I need to learn today. Run me into the experiences that will today. Introduce me to the people who will best inform me today.
Yes.
That would be an effective way to take the ego out of the equation, and then trust that that will happen for better or for worse, even if you don't like it?
Well, when we offer ourselves to be our small self, you see, it's a journey from the small self to the larger self. And so when we say, use me as your instrument, then we are really surrendering our will and our desires, because when we're asking to be used as an instrument, it can sometimes be ways in which we enjoy, but sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes we're being used in ways that we would prefer not to be used. So our own ego, our own will, has to be sidetracked.
A practical question, situation. I'm getting ready to go to work. I'm walking into a den of people who love to gossip, and I get sucked into it, and so does everybody else. If I started the day by saying, lead me, show me, teach me, introduce me to what's in my best interest to grow today, and I'll accept it, and I trust that you'll do this, how can I hear correctly the word of that guidance? How do I, in other words, let's say I'm going to work and there's 5 people gossiping and they're standing in front of my desk and I have to go through them to get to my desk. How do I know I'm not being led to those who are gossiping, just as an example?
You probably will be led to those who are gossiping, just as an example to present to them that you are happy not gossiping. I think our life has to be like Baba says his life is. He says, my life is my message. But he also says, our life should be his message also. So that quietly, without saying a word, our life can be a message for other people. So you can be put in the middle of your office with the people gossiping and just sit quietly, and you'll find that that will make a difference.
Thank you. I've asked you about how much Baba has helped you with worry and anxiety. What about fear? I don't seem to know anybody who doesn't have fear.
Well, that is again a gradual process of letting go. When you say yes to Baba, then your life is not the same any longer, because you're not the controller of your life. You never have really been, but we think we have been. But when we really say yes, use me as your instrument, then somehow or other the fear does go. And I've had several instances of realizing the absence of fear. 2 years ago, I went to Russia twice when it was freezing cold, and there were 3 buildings at each place. I went in January and again in March, and the steps to each of the buildings were frozen over, and young men would put me in a chair and carry me down the steps, slipping and sliding, and then across the frozen snow and up the steps to another building. And I admit perfectly, honestly, I was terrified. I was quite sure that they were going to drop me, I had once been dropped in a wheelchair and had broken my pelvis, so I knew it could happen. But I kept on saying, I only trust Baba, I only trust the high sea, I only trust my real self. And I trust that whatever is right will happen. But the first time, apparently I didn't learn it, and I still had fear the second time. And I did the same thing. I just said Om Sai Ram, or I only trust Baba, I only trust the high sea, I only trust my real self. I'm your instrument, do with me whatever you want. And I was interested because just very recently, before I came here, I was in Poland, and again, there were many, many steps up to the room where I was sleeping for the night, and I had to go up and down those steps many times during the day. It wasn't frozen over this time.
Just a lot of steps.
Many steps, many series of 20 steps, and then a stop, and then 20 more, and so forth and so on. And again, two very strong young Polish men took me in a regular chair and carried me up and down, and I was so thankful that this time I had lost the fear.
So are you telling me today, Phyllis, at 94, you are finally without fear?
I don't know. I hope so, but I will find out as I go through whatever it remains of this long, long life.
Jody and I, as we encounter people who have been on Baba's radar for a while, more and more we're finding people who claim to be beyond their fear.
I think I am, but I'm not going to try. I don't want to fool myself.
It's still big in my life. As much as I want to have trust and surrender, there are circumstances that put me into fear still.
It's a process. It's a slow-by-slow, step-by-step process of trusting. In other words, surrender, trust, and accept.
Now, a little bit different from fear is pain and sickness. How does Swami interject himself into your life so that that too can make more sense to you when you feel sick or pain?
Well, he's always said that before we can be enlightened, we have to work out the karma that's still accruing. In other words, whatever we've done in the past, particularly anything negative, we have to be the recipient of that same behavior in order to learn that we should not repeat that negative behavior again. So he says that we have made a contract before we came into this life to work through a certain amount of karma. And so much of the time when people are sick, especially with inherited diseases or very critical problems, it's in order for them to learn what this particular infirmity can teach them. And I've had plenty of that.
Well, numerically, with all the years you've had many opportunities to have lots of lessons come your way.
I hope I've worked out most of it, but I don't know.
Jody told me years ago that the greatest prayer might be the prayer of gratitude. Is it useful to express gratitude not just for all the beautiful things in life, but for also all the painful things in your life?
Oh yes, because everything in our life and everyone in our life, everything that happens to us can be a teacher.
Doesn't tend to make us a masochist if we are grateful for the pain?
No, it's not being masochistic. It's not inviting pain. It's not incurring it. It's handling it when it comes. And it's very interesting to me. I'm in pain a lot of the time when I'm just in my ordinary everyday life. But when I'm working, either in a group, in a seminar with many people, or individually with one person, when I'm really tuned in so that I'm being shown what I can do to help these people, I never feel the pain. It's as if I'm on a different level of consciousness. And I think that Baba himself is always on that level of consciousness, because he says he never feels the pain.
How does Baba help you? We're getting into deeper territory here regarding the death of a friend.
Well, I've had many of those in my life, but also the death of my younger daughter and the death of my husband. And I went to Baba almost immediately after each of those deaths, and everyone said, oh, he's going to be so sympathetic. Not at all. He doesn't consider death as a horror or a fear. It's a natural process that when we finished what we came in to take care of karmically, then it's time to leave and come back again, perhaps another life in a different situation, working out other parts of our karma.
So what do you think is going to happen when we die?
What do you actually mean by that? Where do
When
we
our
go,
body,
or
when our body stops, it sounds like, having to listen to you over many years now, that some of us are destined to repeat another cycle because we haven't learned our lessons.
And we don't know.
It's the dictate of karma. And some rare few individuals, as is always the case, is given the opportunity to move on, to become the reality of the oneness, to be aware that the oneness is all there is. So what happens when we die? Literally, what happens when you die?
I think maybe we'll find out when we do die.
Do you ever have a curiosity about that?
I don't think we can know ahead of time.
And you don't have any concern or fears about that?
No. When you really say to Baba, or the high sea, or your own self, your own God self, use me as your instrument, then you're not the doer any longer. And so whatever happens, you know that you will receive the help you need to deal with whatever it is, whether it's the death of someone or whether it's an accident.
So it sounds like then the grief that's so common when a close one dies is our mourning their absence, our feeling abandoned.
We miss them.
We miss them.
Even when my pets died, my precious little friends who were my cats, I mourned. I was very sad. And Baba told me that when my daughter died and when my husband died, it was important to grieve, but not for too long.
Just to realize that time to go. That they're on a bus or a train heading to a different destination, and it's a natural process of our lives.
Because you see, he teaches us detachment so that we're not attached to the other people, because it's not fair to mourn their going and try to hold on to them to keep them from leaving.
But most of us flunk the test of non-attachment.
Yes. So I think we need people to teach many people that that's not the correct way to be.
It really brings about a whole different understanding of the end of life.
Completely. Well, I've had 3 different near-death experiences, and that has taught me that the real person I am inside, the real self, doesn't die. It's in a different form. And when my daughter died, she visited my older daughter and me just 3 days after she had left. And it was as if her whole spirit came into the room where my older daughter and I were working, and it was her energy. And she told me, it was in my mind, as if she were talking to me, that she couldn't stay very long. She hadn't yet learned how to reduce her refined energy of where she was in her etheric body. She hadn't learned how to bring it down to our much heavier, more physical energy. So she couldn't stay very long. But she wanted me to know that I was right in thinking that God was the great big beating heart of the universe, and it was all God. It was all love. And then she left. And this was an extraordinary experience for both my older daughter and me, because the energy that came into the room was exactly as we had remembered, Lorna.
Seems to me this is something, Phyllis, you need to shout from the top of the tallest buildings, so it helps to reaffirm in our minds more and more and more, not to fear.
I try to share it as often as I can, but some people don't want to hear.
For what reason?
They're terrified of death. Many people think they're going to be snuffed out, and that's the end. There's nothing after death. But actually, when you think about it, when you're born into this life, it's the death in the other one, in the other dimension. And when we die from this life, it's being born into the other dimension. And it's alternating birth and death.
The concern you speak of regarding some people's feelings that nothing happens beyond death seems to be almost growing in Europe and America with, from what I gather, an increased proportionate number of atheists, more and more, throughout much of the West. And I don't understand that. With people who are blessed with educations, the ability to think, to reflect on life, which is the one thing that separates us from animals, that we can consider it at a deep level, to lose our belief in a creator and in an afterlife. And so that would play into why you say there's more fear about that subject, but something doesn't mesh well. I don't know why there seems to be more doubters than believers.
I think it's because of the state of the world. People don't know how to cope, and also we're being bombarded with many things that are going on in distant parts of the world which we never had to contend with before. And so many people are being overwhelmed, and when they're overwhelmed with horrors or sadness, they become numb and they can't feel any longer. It's almost as if the body or the self is protecting them, and they're becoming almost immune to feeling.
I believe Baba doesn't want one of us to feel any more special than anyone else, yet Baba devotees are still but a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole world's population. How should devotees feel about the gift they have, the awareness they have?
I think one most important feeling is one of gratitude, that we are born at this time in history when Baba is physically present.
Does it serve any constructive purpose to spread the word, to proselytize, to share Baba with others, including those who don't ask about him but may profit from their awareness of him once they find out that he exists?
He always tells us not to advertise him, not to proselytize, but he's perfectly capable of advertising himself. So he really requires us to stay as silent as possible, and he says his life is his message, that so must our lives be. And so it's really by the way we live that we will attract others to him. And I've always made it a practice of never mentioning Baba unless somebody asks, or if they ask why I'm the way I am, or why I didn't get angry or something, then that's an opening. But then I watch their eyes, and as soon as they glaze over or they begin to fidget, then I know I've said too much. So then I stop.
So he really does seem to be an acquired taste. He does seem to
taste? I've never heard that before.
Well, they say that about rare scotch, so maybe I better not use that as an analogy.
I think that's delightful.
But those
I think he is an acquired taste, yes.
But those who are looking for him seem destined to find him, and the others will only when it's their time.
Well, look at me. I didn't even know he was on the earth until I was 59.
Baba says do seva. You do all sorts of seva. What's the seva that most satisfies you?
I think it's when I'm working with someone or with a group, and they are able to get an insight into the core or the reason or the root of some of their problems. And that's a revelation for most people, because most of our problems stem from something that happened in childhood. And whatever happened, whatever trauma happened when we were children, we couldn't cope with it. We didn't have the ability because we were too young. And so it's almost as if our subconscious is like a computer, and everything that's ever happened to us, everyone we've ever met, everything that we've ever heard or felt is still very definitely as alive as when it happened. in the subconscious. And so we have to trace back where some of our fears came from, usually in a trauma, a loss, or an accident, or an illness, or punishment, which we couldn't possibly deal with. And so it got pushed into the subconscious. We forgot about it, but it's still there, and small parts of us are still stuck back there at the age when traumas happened. So we might have a small part that was still 2 years old. We might still have a small part that's 5 or 7. And then we can help those parts to grow up so that we're not always acting like spoiled children, or unhappy children, or frustrated children.
But Phyllis, here's the paradox. It's called the subconscious for a reason. We're not conscious of it.
No, we're not.
So how do we start to ferret out or lift to the light of day so that they'll become reprocessed in a better way some of these awful experiences from 50, 70 years ago in people's lives?
Well, you asked me what was the most gratifying part of my life or my work, and I mentioned that it's when I am able, in a group, or when I give seminars, or in a single session, gradually and gently to ask enough questions to get to the core of the problem. It's usually a trauma, as I said, or somebody saying something negative, or being punished in some way. And that is wonderful, because then the person gets an insight, and it's like, oh, now I understand. And that is pure joy.
So there is a process that if we care enough and are willing to work hard enough, is incongruous as it seems, that we can actually penetrate the subconsciousness of our existence. We can go examine that computer bank filled with all of our experiences.
And it frequently comes up in dreams.
Well, that does sound like hugely satisfying seva for Baba.
It really is.
Do you know devotees or non-devotees who have ever arrived at what Baba calls that state of equanimity? And how did they get there?
No, because Baba says himself that we shouldn't be tricked into thinking that we are self-realized or illuminated if we get just a quick vision of it, if we can feel the bliss or the equanimity, because it has to be constant. We can get experiences of it, but they're just signposts along the way to keep us going. And real enlightenment is a state where most people are not even aware.
So, in those who are lucky enough to experience a momentary experience of enlightenment, fall back into the rut of their daily lives, that is not an enlightened being.
And many people are going around the world saying they're enlightened.
We need to be cautious.
They've had an experience like this, and then they take it for the real thing. And Baba says it's not. It sounds only like a light along the way.
They're living a life of self-deception, and
yes, definitely.
Well, I'm glad I asked that, because there are people we know.
Oh yes.
Who say that about themselves.
Oh yes.
And I'm not quite sure what purpose that serves. It seems to me if I were around somebody like that, I would know it by the way they are all the time, their consistent level of peace and love and equanimity.
Well, Baba is always at that level. But I personally don't know anyone who's always at that level. And I certainly am not.
Just a couple of more left. How much have you learned about this subject we've mentioned a couple of times today called surrender? How much have you learned to surrender all to Baba? It seems like such a daunting task for us to learn.
If you tried to do it all at once, I think it would be such a shock you'd probably die. It has to be gradual. As each thing comes up, then you have to renew your surrender.
And this concept called non-attachment to outcome. It seems like it should be easy. I've tried it. For me, it's
the hardest thing in the world to achieve.
Yeah.
We're all attached to things, to people, to old ways of living, to traditions, to habits, to addictions, to possessions.
You know, you've been following Baba around now for almost half a century, even though you started late.
Well, it's longer.
Well, 59 is when you started.
Well, I was it was in January of 73 when I first heard about Baba.
So not quite, but a good number of years.
Yes.
Of all the lessons of his that you've been exposed to, do a couple stand out as being the most meaningful to you, the most important?
By lessons, what do you mean?
Oh,
I want to be sure I understand your question.
that's a good question. I'm glad you threw it back to me, because his teachings aren't always necessarily lessons, and his teachings seem to be deceptively simple sometimes.
Oh yes, he always says, keep it simple. And the majority of people have been taught that the more complicated it is, the more important it is.
And the one I'm thinking about right now, and I'm sure I won't get the words right, so help me, is enjoy my surprise or uncertainty.
I love my uncertainty.
There we go.
Which most people hate.
Love my uncertainty. Now, I'm not sure if that qualifies as a lesson or not, but it's certainly one of his teachings. And,
oh, yes.
And what does that mean to you? Because that's a big one for me.
It means that you just trust your God self or your high seed, and whatever happens, don't go into shock. It's an acceptance. You see, it's surrender, trust, and accept. And this is the acceptance. You just accept whatever comes, and then ask for the help that you need to go through it.
And again, I'm not sure if lessons is the right word, but my thinking is that one of his most profound teachings to us, especially in the West, is this notion of Advaita, of the oneness, of meaning that this life must be an illusion, because in this life as I see it, I'm separate from God, and yet he's telling me I'm not separate. So if I'm truly not separate, then what I see as life is a play, is a dream.
Yes.
It can't be real. But that's really almost impossible for me to understand. How can it not be real?
Because it seems awfully real.
Doesn't it seem real to you?
I think it's, yes, I think when we're living in it, it has to be real in order for us to deal with it. But we have to realize that this is a school in which we're living. The world in which we live is like a school, and everything in it and everyone in it can be a teacher. So then you can turn sometimes very negative things into very real benefits if you twist them around and ask yourself, what can I learn from this, instead of moaning and groaning, which most of us do. What's it to teach us? And then it changes the whole thing. Then it can be a benefit or a lesson.
I'm going to
It's not easy.
No, I know. I think all of us who have tried to know how difficult it is.
Easy.
I'd like to conclude with a comment from you on a subject I heard you address so well to a dozen women who were here in Hal Honig's home last night when the subject of meditation came up. And it's not easy for almost anybody I know. It's not easy for me. And I wanted to ask you about Baba's advice to you about meditation, and that prompted an interesting response that Baba gave you about that topic. Want to share that with us?
Yes, I'd be delighted to, because it was such a surprise to me. When we went to see Baba, we had heard that many of the other masters, many of whom we had met before we ever knew Swami, always gave their followers a meditation, or they would give them a mantra. And so when we were given the farewell interview, which he was giving in those days to people when they left the ashram, I asked if he was going to give me a mantra. And he said, oh no, no mantra. No set meditation. It should be all day long, and it should be on your breath. He said you have to breathe to stay alive, so this will keep you remembering. And when you breathe in, you say so, and when you breathe out, you say hum. But you do it mentally, you do it in your mind, and it has to be on your breath. and the so and the hum mean I and thou are one. And that has to go on all day long. And then he sang it to me, and I thought he wanted me to practice to sing it with him, and he said no, not out loud, inside, so that you've always got that song going, or that mantra going in your mind. Now that's impossible to begin with. It's intermittent, and it's a gradual process.
I'm tempted to ask a really silly, stupid question to say at the end of this.
Oh, I never like it when people say it's a silly question, because most questions have a reason. If it's important enough for you to ask, it's not silly.
How much do you love Sai Baba?
Oh dear. That's not a silly question. That's a very, very big question. I don't know how to measure. I can't answer that. I don't know. I hope it's enough.
Phyllis Krystal, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me in the role of a student. And let's make a date 5 years from now to do it again.
If I'm alive still, I don't know. I'm 94 now.
Thank you very much. God bless and Sai Ram.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Ted.